In today's competitive global marketplace, ordinary success just isn't enough anymore. Anybody can buy a sports car. Anybody can buy a mansion. But can your operation accidentally sound like the plot of 6 conspiracy movies smashed together at 3 o'clock in the morning? Introducing the Sosa International Business Package. The complete executive starter kit for aspiring international power brokers, political chaos enthusiasts, and cartoonishly ambitious scumbags everywhere. Inside every package you receive, one mysterious mountain compound, 3 nervous guys in expensive suits who only say, "We'll discuss this privately," a complimentary stack of offshore banking paperwork nobody fully understands. And of course, our deluxe edition includes one aggressively uncomfortable government meeting, 2 anonymous phone calls at 2:13 a.m., and a giant room where every conversation somehow feels like somebody's about to disappear. But wait, there's more. Order in the next 10 minutes and receive the Cocaine Coupe Expansion Pack. Includes a suspicious military friend, several briefcases nobody asked questions about, and a free pair of sunglasses for staring silently at people while pretending you're absolutely not planning something horrifying. Because why build a business when you can accidentally create an international historical nightmare? The Sosa International Business Package. Not available in stores, democracies, or functioning moral systems. Rapid disclaimer voice, Pizzaverse Studios does not endorse coups, dictators, cocaine empires, evil schemes, mysterious briefcases, international corruption, or becoming a historically documented scumbag. Side effects include paranoia, investigations, and becoming the subject of future documentaries. History, what are you gonna do? Disclaimer. This documentary is intended for commentary, historical discussion, satire, analysis, and entertainment purposes only. No statement should be interpreted as a formal accusation of criminal conduct beyond what has been publicly documented, historically reported, litigated, or publicly discussed. Some scenes contain satire, dramatic interpretation, sarcasm, and reconstruction for storytelling purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. And as always in the Pizzaverse, if you don't like how you're remembered by history, maybe don't spend your life auditioning for the role of international supervillain.
A Pizzaverse Studios production. In association with Palermo Productions. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Edited somewhere in Jersey after midnight. The Real Sosa-Scarface sold the myth. Bolivia sold the nightmare. Everybody remembers Tony Montana. Big mansion. Big mouth. Big pile of cocaine. Say hello to his little friend. Movie history. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Tony Montana wasn't the scary guy in Scarface. No. The scary guy sat in a quiet room, spoke softly, wore suits, smiled politely, and looked at chaos the way accountants look at tax paperwork. Alejandro Sosa. The man in the movie who felt less like a gangster and more like somebody that accidentally wandered out of a government meeting and into a criminal empire. And everybody asks the same question. Was Sosa real? Short answer. Yeah. Long answer? Oh, forget about it. Because reality somehow looked at Scarface and said, Cute movie, hold my drink. This wasn't just a drug dealer. This was Roberto Suarez, a man who allegedly supplied enough cocaine to make the entire decade of the 1980s look like one giant bad decision. And unlike movie villains, this guy didn't need dramatic music. History already gave him some. The Real Sosa. In Scarface, Alejandro Sosa was presented as part political elite, part cocaine king, part businessman. Tony Montana goes to Bolivia. Deals happen. Money flows. People die. Miami explodes. Roll credits. Simple. Reality. Reality looked at that script and said, nah, add war criminals, add coups, add international insanity. Because Roberto Suarez wasn't some local hustler. At one point, people estimated he controlled a massive percentage of the world's cocaine-based supply. Think about that. Not a neighborhood. Not a city. Not a state. The world. That ain't a criminal operation. That's Amazon Prime with machine guns. The devil in the mountains. The first thing you gotta understand about Alejandro Sosa is this. Guys like him don't scream. They don't pound tables. They don't run around waving guns like they drank 12 espressos and watched 3 gangster movies in a row. Nah. Guys like Sosa sit still. And somehow that's worse. Because while street guys are busy yelling loyalty and punching walls, men like Sosa are already thinking 5 moves ahead. Tony Montana came from chaos. Alejandro Sosa controlled chaos. See, by the time Tony flew down to Bolivia, he thought he understood power. Tony had already seen blood. Already survived prison. Already lied, cheated, killed, and clawed his way out of refugee camps and Miami gutters. But Bolivia was a different planet. This wasn't South Beach cocaine cowboys with gold chains and rented Cadillacs. This was industrial-scale insanity. This was mountains. Airstrips. Private armies. Politicians. Judges. Military protection. Entire governments moving like chess pieces. Tony thought he was meeting a drug dealer. Instead, he walked into the office of a man who looked like he could order weather patterns. And Sosa knew exactly what Tony was the second he saw him. Not because Tony spoke. Not because Tony negotiated. Because predators recognize predators. See, Sosa smiles through most of Scarface. That smile always bothered me. Because it ain't a happy smile. It's one of those smiles people give you when they already know how your story ends. Like, yeah, you're entertaining, kid. You're dangerous. You're ambitious. And eventually you're gonna destroy yourself. Tony saw opportunity. Sosa saw inevitability. Big difference. Because men like Sosa survive by understanding one thing. Everybody's got a weakness. Some people love money. Some love power. Some love women. Some love ego. Tony Tony loved Tony. And that right there, that's where the cracks started. Because Alejandro Sosa was calm, cold, patient. The kind of guy that looked like he could have a man disappear and still make dinner reservations by 7 o'clock. No panic. No emotion. No drama. Street guys create storms. Sosa sat above storms. And maybe that's why his scenes hit different. Because while Tony Montana felt larger than life, Sosa felt real. Too real. Because history's full of guys exactly like him. Not loud gangsters. Not flashy celebrities. Quiet businessmen with armies behind smiles. The kind of guys newspapers barely mention. The kind of guys governments pretend don't exist. The kind of guys sitting 3 rooms away from every decision. And that's what makes Sosa scary. Not the money. Not the cocaine. Not the power. The control. Because when Tony met Sosa, he thought he found a business partner. But what he really found was gravity. And gravity always wins. The king of Miami builds a castle of cocaine. Miami changed fast. Too fast. 1 minute you got palm trees, tourists, retirees eating dinner at 4 in the afternoon, and guys in pastel shirts pretending life is simple. Then suddenly, money starts falling out of the sky. Not regular money either. Cocaine money. The kind of money that shows up overnight and asks absolutely no questions. And once Alejandro Sosa opened the pipeline, Tony Montana turned into a damn machine. Now understand something. Tony wasn't selling little bags on street corners. We're way past that. This wasn't neighborhood hustle territory anymore. This was empire building. Ships. Warehouses. Distribution. Lawyers. Bankers. Politicians. Guys in expensive suits suddenly developing selective blindness. Because everybody wants morality. Until money starts showing up in truckloads. Funny how that works. And Tony? Tony loved every second of it. The cars got bigger. The suits got louder. The watches got shinier. The ego? Forget about it. That thing got so big it needed its own zip code. See, early Tony had hunger. Hunger makes people sharp. Hunger makes people dangerous. But success starts whispering. Real quiet. Real smooth. It leans over your shoulder and says, "You ain't got to listen anymore. You made it. You're smarter than everybody now." And people buy it. Every damn time. Because once human beings start believing they built mountains by themselves, they stop looking down. That's when gravity starts warming up in the bullpen. Meanwhile, Miami looked like somebody set capitalism on fire. Suddenly, there were Ferraris everywhere. Gold chains heavy enough to sink fishing boats. Nightclubs glowing till sunrise. Champagne flying around like somebody forgot money had value. The city itself started acting drunk. Because that's the thing nobody tells you. Money changes neighborhoods. Fast money changes reality. And cocaine money? That changes souls. Bodies started stacking up. Shootings. Bombings. Fear. News anchors staring into cameras looking like they just witnessed the apocalypse. And underneath all of it, Tony kept climbing. Higher. 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 Because Tony Montana had a disease. Not greed. Not violence. Not even anger. No. Tony had certainty. He believed every room belonged to him. Every throne belonged to him. Every person eventually answered to him. That's dangerous. Because fear keeps people alive. Doubt keeps people cautious. Paranoia keeps people breathing. But certainty? Certainty gets people buried. And while Tony stood inside his giant mansion, looking over Miami like a king, he missed something. Kings build castles. Smart kings build walls. Tony built mirrors. Everything became Tony. Tony's face. Tony's wants. Tony's ego. Tony's legend. And castles made of mirrors got a funny habit. Sooner or later, they crack. Miami becomes a fever dream. Miami didn't change. It mutated. Palm trees stayed. Ocean stayed. Neon lights stayed. The beaches still looked beautiful. Tourism commercials still played. Postcards still showed sunsets and smiling couples walking along the water. If you looked from far away, everything seemed normal. But underneath, different city. Completely different city. Money started moving faster than laws. Entire neighborhoods learned survival. Luxury became camouflage. Violence became communication. And eventually the city stopped asking questions. Because boomtowns can be cruel. Everybody loves fast money. Nobody likes reading the receipt later. And suddenly Miami felt less like a city. And more like somebody plugged Wall Street directly into a nightclub and forgot to unplug it. Cash moved everywhere. Suitcases. Cars. Hotel rooms. Airplanes. Duffel bags. Storage lockers. Entire fortunes appearing overnight. One day, somebody's driving a used sedan. 3 weeks later, he's pulling into a nightclub in a Ferrari wearing enough gold jewelry to bend his spine. And everybody just stared. Not because they were shocked. Because eventually people got used to it. That's how strange things happen. Not all at once. Slowly. Little by little. Until insanity becomes routine. And Miami started running on a different clock. Nightlife exploded. Nightclubs packed shoulder to shoulder. Champagne pouring. Music shaking walls. Speedboats racing through marinas. People dancing while fortunes moved around the city faster than weather patterns. Everybody smiling. Everybody partying. Everybody pretending the whole thing would somehow last forever. History always shows you those pictures. The beaches. The white suits. The cars. The glamour. Funny thing about history. History loves showing the party. History almost never shows you what happened after everybody went home. Because while tourists snapped photos, while businessmen ordered expensive dinners, while magazine covers sold dreams, another Miami existed. A darker Miami. Bodies started appearing. Gunfire became background noise. Murder rates climbed. Police departments got overwhelmed. Stories became impossible. And eventually people realized something terrifying. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't some weird little criminal wave. The storm had moved in permanently. Because cities adapt. Cities survive. And Miami adapted by learning to live beside chaos. That's what people do. Humans normalize almost anything if it stays around long enough. And eventually the city stopped saying, "What the hell is happening?" Instead, people started asking, "How do I get a piece of this?" Because temptation is powerful. Money is powerful. And fast money? Fast money can make entire cities start acting strange. Real strange. And somewhere beneath the neon lights, beneath the palm trees, beneath the champagne and nightclub music, an empire was quietly building itself. And Miami, whether it realized it or not, had become the center of a fever dream. The bill always comes. See, here's the thing about empires. Nobody ever thinks they're gonna be the guy on the way down. Never. Every empire in history looked permanent, right up until the moment it wasn't. Kings said it. Politicians said it. Wall Street said it. Drug lords definitely said it. And Tony Montana? Tony looked around that mansion and probably figured he beat the system itself. Because from the outside, things looked perfect. Money stacked to the ceiling. Cars lined up outside. Security everywhere. Luxury pouring out of every room. The American dream. If the American dream had severe anger issues and access to machine guns. But underneath all that marble and cocaine dust, cracks. Big cracks. Because pressure was building from every direction. The cops were closing in. Federal agencies started sniffing around. Competitors were getting nervous. Partners were getting nervous. Everybody starts getting nervous when one guy gets too big. Because huge empires create a problem. People start asking questions. Questions ruin everything. Where's the money going? Who's paying who? Who's protected? Who's talking? And then came the banks. Now here comes one of history's favorite jokes. You can flood cities with mountains of cocaine. You can create oceans of violence. You can build criminal kingdoms. But eventually some guy in a tie behind a desk goes, "Excuse me, sir, we're having concerns with your paperwork." Paperwork. That's what gets ya. Not bullets. Not gang wars. Not helicopters. A guy with reading glasses and accounting forms. Absolutely incredible. Because while Tony was busy believing he conquered reality, reality was filing reports. And then came Sosa. See, Sosa wasn't loud. That's what made him dangerous. Guys who scream usually tell you exactly where they stand. But quiet men? Quiet men let you dig your own grave. Sosa understood business. Tony understood conquest. Big difference. And once Tony refused to play by Sosa's rules, the clock started ticking. Because people love loyalty speeches. Everybody talks loyalty. Everybody posts quotes. Everybody acts like they're starring in some dramatic movie. But criminal empires don't run on loyalty. They run on usefulness. The second usefulness disappears. Things get real cold. Real fast. Tony had spent years climbing. Years building. Years becoming larger than life. But here's the problem with becoming larger than life. Eventually, life wants its space back. And somewhere inside that giant mansion, inside all the noise, inside all the money, inside all the chaos, Tony Montana finally started hearing something. Not police sirens. Not enemies. Not gunfire. No. Something worse. The sound of the bill arriving. And history? History always collects. No exceptions. Scarface lied to you. All right, now, before people start throwing VHS tapes across the room and yelling at me through the screen. Relax. Scarface is still one of the greatest gangster movies ever made. Legendary. Iconic. Explosive. You got Al Pacino chewing scenery like he was personally trying to intimidate the camera lens. You got mountains of cocaine. Chainsaws. One-liners. Violence. Chaos. A mansion that looked like somebody gave a king unlimited credit cards and absolutely zero supervision. Cinema, beautiful. Reality, different animal. Because here's where things get weird. People watched Scarface and walked away thinking, Tony Montana was the whole machine. No. Not even close. Tony was the fireworks. The real world had accountants, bankers, pilots, importers, lawyers, politicians, businessmen, entire systems. See, movies need heroes and villains. The men who fed Miami. Now here's where the movie version starts leaving stuff out. Because Miami didn't become Miami because of one guy. Not Tony. Not Sosa. Not one kingpin. No shot. Cities don't transform because of one man. Cities change because entire systems start moving. And during the cocaine boom, everybody was moving. Pilots. Smugglers. Middlemen. Distributors. Money guys. Politicians. Businessmen. And a whole lot of people suddenly developing selective eyesight. Because apparently once enough cash starts hitting the table, human beings develop a fascinating medical condition called I ain't seen nothing syndrome. Very serious condition. Hits politicians hard. Sometimes bankers too. Symptoms include looking directly at obvious insanity and suddenly becoming legally blind. Absolutely tragic. Because cocaine wasn't arriving in little movie packages. This was industrial scale. Planes landing on hidden strips. Boats coming through the Caribbean. Suitcases. Real life gives you paperwork and logistics. Not sexy. Not cinematic. But that's where the power lived. Because the actual cocaine explosion of the late 70s and 80s wasn't one guy with a machine gun standing on a staircase screaming at destiny. It was infrastructure. Supply chains. Money laundering. Transportation networks. Layers and layers of people nobody remembers. And that's where the lie starts. Because Hollywood gave everybody the fantasy. The loud guy. The flashy guy. The king sitting at the top of the mountain. But history says something uglier. The loud guy usually ain't the boss. Half the time, the loud guy is the distraction. The real operators stay invisible. The guy at the top rarely wants attention. Attention gets people arrested. Attention creates headlines. Attention creates investigations. Attention creates documentaries 20 years later where everybody suddenly remembers they knew something. Funny how memory works. And then there's the other lie. The money. Movies make criminal empires look glamorous. Fast cars. Pools. Jewelry. Champagne. Like every day is some giant party. Meanwhile, reality looked more like no sleep. Paranoia. Watching doors. Watching phones. Watching friends. Watching enemies. Watching everybody. Because eventually success turns into prison. Only difference? The prison got marble floors. And maybe that's why Scarface hit people so hard. Not because it showed power. Because underneath all the chaos, it accidentally showed the truth. Tony Montana wasn't becoming free. He was building a cage. And every day, he added another bar, Miami becomes a fever dream. By the early 80s, Miami stopped feeling like a city. It started feeling like a hallucination. No, seriously. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your town suddenly looked like somebody mixed tropical postcards, cocaine money, neon lights, paranoia, and absolute human madness into a blender and hit high. That was Miami. Palm trees. Ferraris. Speedboats. Nightclubs glowing until sunrise. Money flying around like confetti at a party nobody remembered starting. And underneath all that sunshine, pure chaos. Because while tourists saw beaches, locals were seeing bodies. See, the city started changing so fast, people barely had time to process it. Entire neighborhoods transformed overnight. Suddenly, 20-year-olds with no visible jobs were driving cars worth more than houses. Guys who couldn't explain where they got lunch money 6 months earlier suddenly owned boats. Nobody asked questions. Or maybe they did. But deep down, they already knew the answer. And here's where things got ugly. Violence stopped feeling shocking. That's dangerous. Warehouses. Entire routes moving product like corporations move inventory. Except instead of shipping furniture, they were shipping chaos. And Miami? Miami became the front door. Every day, more money poured in. And once the money arrived, everybody ate. Nightclubs exploded. Construction projects appeared overnight. Luxury towers climbed into the sky. Businesses started growing faster than weeds after rain. Because dirty money's got a weird effect. It moves fast. Very fast. Too fast. See, regular money takes time. Drug money walks into a room and starts acting like it owns the place immediately. And the scary part, a lot of people loved it. Not just criminals, regular people. Because money doesn't come with labels attached. Nobody opens a briefcase and sees, warning, may contain violence, corruption, and social collapse. Nope. They just see numbers. And numbers make people real forgiving. That's the part movies skip. Because every empire got helpers. Not gunmen, not killers, helpers. The people who told themselves, not my business. I'm just handling paperwork. I'm just moving money. I'm just doing my job. History's packed with those people. Always has been. Because giant machines don't run on monsters alone. They run on ordinary people deciding not to ask questions. And while Miami kept partying, the foundation underneath the city kept getting darker. Because eventually a city built on easy money starts forgetting what normal looks like. And once that happens, good luck putting the genie back in the bottle. Everybody wanted a piece of Miami. Nobody wanted the bodies that came with it. Funny how that works. People love the highlight reel. Not the consequences. Not the funerals. Not the families. Not the fear. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Miami stopped belonging to itself. Because money was now steering the wheel. Not politicians. Not police. Not ordinary people. Money. And money doesn't care about neighborhoods. Money doesn't care about morality. Money doesn't care who gets crushed. Money only wants one thing: more money. That's when a city stops feeling real. That's when it becomes a fever dream. And fever dreams, eventually you wake up. The scumbags always wear suits. Now, when people picture criminal empires, they usually imagine the same thing. Guys with guns, gold chains, flashy cars, some loudmouth screaming into a phone while threatening everybody within a 5-mile radius. Hollywood trained everybody real good. But history? History laughs at that version. Because a lot of the biggest damage in the world gets done by people wearing ties, nice shoes, pressed suits, perfect hair. Guys who look like they sell insurance and ask if you want sparkling or still water. That's the trick. Because by the time Miami's cocaine explosion reached full speed, not everybody involved looked like a gangster. Some looked like businessmen. Some looked like bankers. Some looked like professionals. Some looked like respectable citizens with offices and family photos on their desks. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because the machine got too big for street guys alone. Street guys can move product. Street guys can create fear. Street guys can create chaos. But empires? Empires need structure. They need people moving money. People cleaning money. People signing papers. People asking exactly 0 questions. Because eventually somebody's gotta explain why money is pouring into the city, like somebody opened a fire hydrant filled with $100 bills. And suddenly, construction projects started appearing. Banks got real friendly. Businesses grew overnight. Buildings climbed into the sky. Everybody got rich. Or at least everybody close enough to the machine. And here's where human beings do that thing they always do. They convince themselves they're innocent. I'm not part of it. I just process transactions. I just handle paperwork. I just provide services. History's favorite sentence. I was just doing my job. Amazing phrase. Absolute Hall of Fame material. Because somehow terrible systems always seem packed with people who think they had nothing to do with anything. Meanwhile, the bodies keep piling up. Strange coincidence. And that's what Scarface never fully shows. Because Tony Montana wasn't standing on top of a mountain alone. He had help. Everybody had help. Entire ecosystems existed around these empires. Not because everybody loved violence. Because everybody loved money. That's colder. Violence at least gets emotional. Money? Money's clinical. Money shakes your hand. Money smiles at you. Money sends thank you cards. And that's why the biggest scumbags don't always kick doors down. Sometimes they sit in air conditioning. Sometimes they sign contracts. Sometimes they wear expensive watches. Sometimes they smile. Because monsters get older. Monsters evolve. And eventually monsters learn to dress nice. The money became its own religion. By now, the cocaine boom wasn't just changing Miami. It was changing people. That's different. Cities change all the time. Skylines change. Buildings go up. Neighborhoods shift. But when people start changing, when values start changing, that's when things get weird. Because eventually the money got so big, so absurd, that it stopped feeling like money. It became mythology. See, regular people think in numbers. A few $100s. A paycheck. Rent. Groceries. Maybe a vacation if life behaves itself. But cocaine money lived on another planet. Millions became normal. Millions turned into tens of millions. Tens became hundreds. And once human beings start dealing with numbers that big, their brains start malfunctioning. Because the human mind ain't built for it. You stop seeing money as money. You start seeing it as power, status, identity, control. And eventually, you start worshiping it. That's the part nobody says out loud. Money became religion. No church. No stained glass. No choir. Just marble offices. Nightclubs. Private jets. Gold watches. People chasing numbers like salvation itself was hiding in bank accounts. And once money becomes religion, everything else starts getting sacrificed. Family. Friends. Morality. Sleep. Loyalty. Human beings. All of it goes on the altar. Because religions need believers. And Miami had believers everywhere. Guys risking prison. Guys risking murder. Guys risking their own families. All chasing a number that never stayed big enough. That's the scam. Nobody tells you the finish line moves. You get rich, you want more. You get powerful, you want more. You become feared, you want more. Human beings got a terrible habit. We get used to miracles real quick. Yesterday's dream becomes today's expectation. Today's expectation becomes tomorrow's disappointment. And then the chase starts all over again. Tony Montana learned that. Alejandro Sosa learned that. Entire cities learned that. Because eventually people stopped asking, how much is enough? And started asking, how much more? Dangerous question. Real dangerous. Because once greed stops being behavior and starts becoming culture, you ain't dealing with a criminal problem anymore. You're dealing with belief. And beliefs are hard to kill. Especially when everybody's getting paid. The city learns to look away. Now here comes the part that always happens. Every time. History's got patterns, see? People act shocked afterward. Everybody suddenly becomes a philosopher. Everybody claims they saw it coming. Everybody says, I knew something was wrong. Sure you did. Right. Funny how everybody turns into a genius after the building's already on fire. Because while Miami was transforming into a neon fever dream, powered by mountains of cocaine money, most people weren't standing around screaming warnings. Nah. Most people were living life. Going to work. Paying bills. Going out to dinner. Watching television. Trying to survive. And little by little, the abnormal became normal. That's how it happens. Not overnight. Not with giant speeches. Not with dramatic music. Piece by piece, you see another luxury tower appear. You hear about another shooting. You hear rumors. You hear whispers. You hear stories. Then eventually you stop reacting. Because human beings adapt. It's one of our superpowers. Also one of our biggest flaws. Because eventually your brain starts saying, well, I guess this is life now. Dangerous sentence. Very dangerous. Because once people accept insanity, insanity starts paying rent and unpacking furniture. And Miami started learning to look away. People saw suspicious money, looked away. Saw weird business deals, looked away. Saw violence, looked away. Saw obvious corruption, looked away. Because asking questions creates problems. Questions make life messy. Questions make people uncomfortable. And people love comfort. Always have. See, everybody wants courage in theory. Everybody loves imagining themselves as the hero. But reality? Reality usually looks like, hey, not my business. History's got entire graveyards filled with consequences from people deciding something wasn't their business. And here's the cold part. The machine depended on that. Because giant systems don't survive through fear alone. They survive through participation. Silence, convenience. People convincing themselves somebody else will deal with it. Meanwhile, nobody deals with anything. Because everybody assumes somebody else exists. Spoiler alert, that mysterious somebody else never shows up. And by the time Miami finally looked around and realized things had gone completely off the rails, the city wasn't standing near the edge anymore. It was already falling. And gravity don't negotiate. History's darkest joke. And just when you think this whole story can't possibly get any stranger, history looks you dead in the eye and says, hold my drink. Because now we gotta talk about one of the most ridiculous, disturbing, unbelievable twists in this entire mess. The kind of thing where if Hollywood wrote it into a script, people would complain it was unrealistic. Too cartoonish, too over the top, too insane. Except this actually happened. See, somewhere in the middle of all this cocaine-fueled chaos, history decided to introduce one more character. Because apparently drug empires, political corruption, violence, military connections, and international insanity just weren't enough. No. Reality said, let's get weird. Enter the nightmare. Enter the ghosts. Enter the leftovers of an older darkness. Because during the era surrounding Bolivia's power struggles and the cocaine trade, names started floating around that sounded less like modern crime stories and more like escaped pages from wartime history. And suddenly the story starts feeling cursed. Like history forgot to separate its files and accidentally shoved 3 different nightmares into the same folder. Because that's the thing nobody tells you: evil doesn't retire. People act like history ends. Like monsters belong neatly in textbooks. Like terrible ideas disappear once wars end. Nah. History recycles. Different suits, different countries, different excuses, same ugliness. And that realization, that's the darkest joke of all. Because people like clean stories. Bad guy loses. Credits roll. Everybody goes home. But reality leaves fingerprints everywhere. Pieces stick around. Networks survive. Connections survive. Power survives. And decades later, somebody's staring at documents thinking, wait a second. How the hell are these people connected? That's when history gets uncomfortable. Because suddenly you realize events you thought lived in separate worlds weren't separate at all. And maybe that's why stories like this feel so bizarre. Not because they're unbelievable. Because they force you to admit something worse. Reality doesn't organize itself neatly. Reality's messy. Reality's chaotic. Reality's got a sick sense of humor. And every once in a while, history tells a joke so dark, nobody laughs. The cost of empires. By now, the party looked unstoppable. Money everywhere. Nightclubs packed. Champagne pouring. Palm trees swaying. Ferraris flying down highways like every driver suddenly believed traffic laws were optional suggestions. From the outside, Miami looked like paradise. But paradise has a funny habit. Somebody always pays for it. Always. That's the part empires never put in the brochures. Because empires sell the dream, never the invoice. See, everybody sees the king standing on the balcony. Nobody sees the bodies holding the foundation together underneath. And there were bodies. A lot of bodies. Families losing sons. Kids growing up around violence. Neighbors hearing gunfire so often they stopped reaching for the phone. Police officers burning out. Communities changing overnight. Fear settling into places that used to feel normal. Because cocaine wasn't just moving through Miami. It was moving through lives. That's the thing about giant criminal systems. People think destruction happens at the top. No. Destruction rolls downhill. Always. The guys sitting in mansions, they got walls, security, money, distance. Meanwhile, regular people catch the fallout. The waitress, the mechanic, the grocery store owner, the family down the block. The people who never asked to be part of somebody else's empire. Because bullets don't care, violence doesn't care, chaos definitely doesn't care. And while money kept flowing, everybody started pretending the bill wasn't building. Real popular strategy throughout history. Ignore reality and hope reality gets bored. Never works, not once. Empires love acting permanent. Roman Empire, financial empires, political empires, criminal empires, same routine every time. People inside the machine start believing the machine can't stop. Then reality shows up wearing steel toe boots. Because eventually pressure builds. Law enforcement builds cases. Enemies regroup. Governments react. Partners turn. People panic. And panic? Panic destroys empires faster than bullets ever could. Because when fear enters the room, loyalty starts checking exits. And suddenly the giant machine that looked invincible starts wobbling. Just a little at first, then more, then more. Because that's the hidden cost. Not money, not luxury, not power. The cost is this. Eventually, every empire becomes too heavy to carry itself. And once the weight wins, everything underneath gets crushed. The fever dream ends. And just like that, the music starts slowing down. The nightclub lights start dimming. The champagne runs dry. The engines cool off. And the fever dream starts waking up. Because every era convinces itself it's different. Every era says, nah, this time we're smarter. This time we got control. This time the party never ends. Then history folds its arms and goes, sure. Miami wasn't just a city during the cocaine era. Miami became a warning. A giant neon warning sign wrapped in palm trees and money. Because this story was never really about cocaine. Not really. Not about Tony Montana. Not about mansions. Not about machine guns. Not even about Alejandro Sosa. It was about appetite. Power. Greed. Ego. The oldest story human beings ever wrote. Because once enough money enters the room, people start changing. Principles get flexible. Morality gets negotiable. And suddenly everybody starts pretending they don't see what's standing right in front of them. Until eventually, they can't ignore it anymore. And then comes the ending. The part nobody wants. Investigations, arrests, violence, funerals, families broken, cities changed forever. Because while movies end with dramatic music and credits rolling, real life leaves scars. Long after everybody goes home. Long after headlines disappear. Long after the money stops moving. And maybe that's why stories like this still hit people decades later. Because deep down people recognize it. Different decade. Different city. Different players. Same game. Always the same game. Because empires built on greed got one fatal flaw. They confuse momentum for immortality. And nothing. Not kings. Not governments. Not cartels. Not legends. Stays on top forever. The fever dream always ends. Always. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's strangest, darkest, and most ridiculous eras, hit that like button, subscribe, and join the family. Because around here, we don't just talk history. We dig through the mess, the psychology, the chaos, The scams. The myths. And all the weird little corners history tries to hide under the rug. There's always another story. And trust me, history's got some real psychos left in the file cabinet. To everybody hanging around in this weird little digital social club, thank you. Seriously. Whether you're watching from Jersey, Florida, New York, Chihuahua, or somewhere halfway across the world at 2 in the morning while avoiding sleep and making terrible life choices, I appreciate every one of you, because this whole thing works because of you. The comments, the theories, the laughs, the late-night conversations, the replay crew, everybody. You built this thing. And around here, we keep moving forward. Stay sharp, and remember, history ain't weird because it's old. History's weird because people never change, and we'll catch you next time. Roberto Suarez Gomez. The alleged real-life Sosa. Imagine if a logistics company and a supervillain origin story had a meeting in Bolivia, called himself the king of cocaine, and reportedly made so much money even reality started sounding fake. Roberto Suarez became one of the largest cocaine suppliers in the world and was tied to Bolivia's cocaine-era expansion. Klaus Barbie. History looked at this guy and said, absolutely not. Somehow a story already involving cocaine empires and coups got even darker when this absolute nightmare wandered into the timeline. Barbie was a Nazi officer nicknamed the Butcher of Lion for torture, deportations, and crimes against humanity. Pablo Escobar. The world's most famous criminal entrepreneur. The guy became so culturally huge, people forget history wasn't a Netflix genre. Actual people had to live through this insanity. Escobar rose as a leader in Colombia's cocaine trade and had supply connections reaching across Latin America. Alejandro Sosa, fictional character from the movie Scarface. The movie version, calm voice, fancy suits, looked like the kind of guy who'd politely ruin your life during a business lunch. The character is widely discussed as being inspired in part by Roberto Suarez and broader cocaine-era power figures.
The Westies. Professional disposal starter kit. When hiding the evidence just ain't enough anymore. Hell's Kitchen. The streets were dirty. The bars smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. And somewhere in the back room of a Manhattan basement, a guy named Eddie Kumisky looked at a corpse and said, "You know what this needs? Better organization." Introducing the Westies Disposal Starter Kit. The official product for emotionally unstable Irish gangsters who think bleach counts as interior decorating. Included in every kit, industrial strength garbage bags, questionably sourced bone saw, union approved butcher apron, 5 gallons of absolutely not suspicious bleach, Sinatra cassette tape for atmosphere, 1 cooler stolen directly off the docks, complimentary bottle of Bushmills for bad decisions, new deluxe edition features, do the Houdini instructional VHS tape, waterproof basement floor tarp, fake alibi generator, 3 reusable fake mustaches for laying low, Jimmy from Hell's Kitchen. Before the Westies starter kit, the FBI kept finding bodies all over the place. Total embarrassment. Now, forget about it. Mikey the union guy. I used to use regular garbage bags like a civilian. Disgusting. These industrial bags changed my life and several investigations. Anonymous longshoreman. 5 stars, strong bleach smell, 0 witnesses. The Westies Professional Disposal Starter Kit. Because everybody deserves a proper send-off. Side effects may include federal indictments, wiretaps, missing associates, conversations with the FBI, Jimmy Coonan screaming at you in a basement, becoming the subject of a 9-hour true crime documentary narrated by a guy from Jersey with blood pressure problems. Order now and receive a free bonus item. Mad Dog Sullivan's Silence Customer Service Package. He never argues with complaints permanently. Disclaimer. The Westies Professional Disposal Starter Kit is not responsible for informants, cooperating witnesses, RICO indictments, sewer recovery operations, floating coolers, betrayal by Irish associates, or mysteriously disappearing union pension funds. Product not available in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, or federal custody. Please dispose of responsibly. The Westies. The body disappears, the prison sentence doesn't.
A good father, 2 sons and a daughter, but he wakes up and he asks himself, why even bother if he cannot feed his family? The wage he's paid's insanity. Every day he's dealing with a new calamity. Lost his old occupation, but it wasn't immigration. It was a machine, automation that replaced him. Politicians left him corruption since the recession, so he grabs his Smith & Wesson, says he'll teach him all the lesson like get down on the ground. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington. Sunk into depression. Congress is defecting, it's been adding to the tension. Came back from war and he's been post-traumatic stressing. Can't afford his medicine he took for his aggression. He needs help, relying on a system that rejects him. Took away his benefits but left him with this weapon. But a one-way ticket, he's entering the thicket.